Anxiety is interesting because it is an evolutionary bottleneck.
When your brain is locked into the what ifs,
Mushing a helpful emotion of fear together with something not supposed to be mushed with, which is planning. What is anxiety trying to tell me? Nothing.
I mean, here's your Prilosec for your heartburn, here's your Ativan for your anxiety. I'm like, that's it? He's like, yeah.
Teaching people to be mindfully aware, or even you can distill that to being curious.
You look at the national data and everybody is more anxious than they were a decade ago.
Yeah.
So what's the problem?
Have you ever felt anxious? Sounds like a trick question, right? How have you managed your anxiety? Have you thought about being curious about your anxiety? That's the topic of today's podcast. I'm Marc Brackett, founding director of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence and author of the new book, Dealing with Feeling. Today, I am joined by Dr. Judson Brewer, often known as Dr. Judd. Judd is an American psychiatrist, neuroscientist, and author whose work sits at the intersection of mindfulness, habit change, and neuroscience. He is currently the Director of Research and Innovation at the Mindfulness Center at Brown University, where he's also an Associate Professor of Behavioral and Social Sciences. We had a tremendous conversation about all things anxiety. I just loved it, and I know you will, too.
I'd love for you to share your comments about this episode, and please subscribe to our channel so you can learn more about how to deal with your feelings. Well, welcome, Judd.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Good to see you.
you too. You're an anxiety researcher. You've been a professor here at Yale, but then you moved and you left us and went to Brown. You've written all these books, and I'm wondering, about my own utility and your utility these days, given that it seems like AI is taking over the world. And so, do we need people like us anymore as a result of artificial intelligence? That was the big question.
I love it. Let's dive right in. So the short answer is I don't know. The slightly longer answer is this is an ongoing experiment that none of us signed consent forms for, but here it is. So and let's dive into a more thoughtful discussion on like what this actually is. So as a professor, I'm exploring this very actively, with my classes in terms of, and I still remember just a year or two ago where it was like, how do we determine if students are cheating on their papers and their assignments? And that is shifted already to, well, we're just going to assume that students are using these things because they you could track them before, you can't really now because they're good enough to and I don't even see that as the question anymore. I really see this as, okay, this is a reality. It's not an eventuality. It's a reality. And so how do we embrace that? How do we think of what it's useful for and what it can't replace? And what my working hypothesis is that I think we can use it as a way to help people become bionic. I don't like the term cyborg. Some people have used it that way, but it's really about how do we leverage skills that our brains are amazing, right? And there are skills that we are never going to have, which is, the computational power of a, that's why it's called a computer, because it computes. So how do we leverage that? I guess one analogy or one similarity is if you look at how the chess, computerized chess evolved over the last, 3, 4, 5 decades. It was, can a computer beat a human? And the answer eventually was yes. And then it turns out that if you pair humans and computers together, they're better than people or humans alone. So you bring a human together with a computer and a computer, according to what I understand, they can't beat a human pair, paired with a computer. So there's a great example of making humans bionic. And I think that's where we really can leverage things. Obviously, my expertise is mostly around, as a psychiatrist, around how do we create bionic clinicians, but we can also be thinking of this as how can we help students learn in college? So for example, I have a seminar and a lot of students aren't going to be as good as my postdocs at reading papers. So I can help them learn how to use AI or conversational agents to help tutor them in how to read a paper. It can
Mm-hmm.
help critique them. It can be a conversational partner for like, hey, did I think about this paper correctly? Instead of waiting for class or coming to my office hours or something like that, where they
Mm-hmm.
can prep for that pretty well, and I think these conversational agents, knowing their limits, for example, don't trust it just because it says something doesn't mean it's true, but it can be a place to start with helping people learn things as a
Yeah.
tutor, for example. But where I'm most interested is clinically, but that actually takes a huge amount of human expertise. So we've been, I think of it as, we've been spending 20 years really as a clinician seeing where the boundaries of clinical practice are, as a researcher looking at the boundaries of our theories around, for example, how anxiety forms and works and how we treat it. So now we're at a place where we're starting to explore how can we make clinicians not only bionic, but also how can we scale treatment? Because one of the big limitations is, there are great clinicians out there, but there aren't enough of them.
Mm-hmm. The one thing that comes to my mind is a phrase that I use, in my work with children and parents is, never worry alone. And and I swear by that, especially for young kids,
Mhm.
because as we know what happens when you worry alone, the rumination, the self-denigration, the criticism, etc. And then, we're in an era where people are attached to their phones looking for advice on how to deal with anxiety. My favorite one recently was this social media guru, influencer who is in her car and she's like, I've decided I'm going to throw my anxiety out the door. And I'm like, Mazel tov, you know, if only could have done that, when I first got my car, almost 40 years ago. Um, and so this quick fix place that we're at in this society that we've probably been for a long time,
Yeah.
with the add-on of AI being this tool you can have on your phone, on your computer, on your, et cetera. What are your thoughts about the relational aspects of healing, and as opposed to the cognitive kind of, like, can you really have a healthy relationship with AI and technology, or is I'm just curious where you're at with that.
Yeah. Well, I think there are a lot of ways that we could explore that. The first one that comes up is, the saying that I heard of, if you're in a relationship, it's important to make sure that you're not the only one in that relationship. Meaning, relationship is a two-way street.
I love that. I haven't,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, that's why AI comes up, because what is a relationship with an, conversational agent? So something can spit words at you that make you feel a certain way. Does that equal a relationship?
Mm-hmm.
I would say that's more instrumental than relational, although it can feel very relational because it elicits the exact same emotions, or it can elicit the exact same emotions that somebody who's actually in a relationship with you offers
Yeah.
when you're talking with them on the phone, for example.
But it makes me think about, I was talking about this with, believe it or not, a personal trainer recently. And he was saying that he feels like AI is going to be um, an advantage for him, because what he was saying was that he really doesn't believe that it can replace a live or even a virtual trainer, because people are just going to like give up on their workouts if AI is like, no, keep working out, like do another set. Like people like, whatever, like it's the computer telling me to do that. But when it's a human, the accountability and that live relationship makes a difference. I don't know. What do you think?
I think to some degree that's true. And, I've even seen, with some of my former colleagues at Yale who've done work, Kathy Carroll's group back in the day did work when they were first studying computerized delivery of CBT, and they did these relationality questions. I forget the specific ones, but they actually found that people formed therapeutic relationships with their computers pretty well and pretty strongly and pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So I think people and just look at, if somebody feels like they're missing their phone, like you can tell pretty quickly that
Mhm.
there's some relationship there,
Yeah.
whether it's a healthy one or not, that's a different question. So I would say, we really need to look a little farther than, is it just a computer telling me to do another set? I
Mhm.
think and some of this goes back to some of the training, so here's a very interesting question that I'm not sure how anybody is going to answer, that is inherent to the system, and I'm not sure that it can actually be changed at this point, is when the big breakthroughs, that there were several big milestones that were hit for breakthroughs. And one of them was learning to use, it's called RLHF. So reinforcement learning with human feedback, meaning that, a bot basically would say, here's answer A and here's answer B. Which one do you like more?
Mhm.
Which is more authentic, which is more human, which answers the question better.
Mhm.
And if you just look at that from a cognitive standpoint, it makes complete sense. What the companies didn't take into account and are now trying to figure out what to do with is that humans are inherently, we're subject to flattery. So if there was this subtle hint of flattery that somebody wasn't even aware of, they're more likely to choose A versus B, because the two are often very
Mhm.
similar. And what this has led to, what this has contributed to, it's not the only cause, but it seems like is one of the drivers, is this whole process called sycophancy, which has
Mhm.
been now, that term is not new, but it is new to
Yeah.
the lexicon for most of the world, because people didn't even know it at once, which basically said it means that it's gonna flatter people. It's gonna tell people they're doing a good job.
Right.
These are gonna inherently be telling people what they want to hear. And that is hugely problematic.
Right. Yeah.
So I
Or
think it
as
can
we've
be
seen in the
solved.
la
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I said, or as we've seen now, a number of cases just in the last few months give people terrible advice, which, ends up, you know, putting people in a place where they take their own life.
Right.
Um,
And that terrible advice doesn't start right at the beginning. It starts with developing trust. It starts with developing a relationship. It starts with somebody feeling isolated from their real world and turning toward this thing that is going to tell them that what they want to hear and not push back. So
yeah.
if you look at therapy, for example, that is not good therapy at all. If somebody is in a therapeutic, it has a therapist and their therapist is just yesing them, then,
Yeah.
I'm sorry to say, they need to break up with their therapist.
Right. Let's backtrack now to and we'll pull, maybe it'll all come back together towards the end. So, how many years now have you been studying anxiety?
Oh, a couple of decades. It's been a while.
And I know that in your work, you can talk about anxiety as a state. You can talk about anxiety as a trait. You can talk about anxiety as some people call themselves anxious people. um, that's a more dispositional anxiety, I guess you can call it that. And then you also talk about it as a habit.
Mhm.
So clean up the language for us around anxiety, please.
Let's start with the definition of anxiety. So if you look at a dictionary definition, it's something to the effect of, feeling of nervousness or unease about an imminent event or something in the future, basically.
Hmm.
So it's interesting because, and I think worry, feeling of worry, right? So if you look at anxiety, it can be a noun where you feel worried, right? You feel nervous, you feel worried, and at the same time, worry is a verb, and in addition to a noun, so, or an adjective. So you worry. So you can feel worried and you can worry, and that is worrisome for defining these things, because we're mixing together uh, uh, thoughts, physical sensations, and actions, mental actions in particular, when we're talking about worrying. So clinically, if we look back when I first, graduated from residency and was starting to treat patients with
Hmm.
anxiety, I was basically taught, give them medication, unfortunately, the number needed to treat basically gives us how well these things work. If you were to play the lottery and somebody came in to see me, it's basically 1 in 5 people are going to show a significant reduction in symptoms when they get the best anxiety medications. So I was playing the medication lottery when new patients would come in, hoping that 1 in 5 won the lottery, whether it's their genes or whatever. But unfortunately, I didn't know what to do with the other 4. And as a clinician, that really made me anxious. Like, how do I help these folks?
80% of the people are not getting better.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's where, in my lab, had been doing habit change research for a while at that point. But I went back to the literature to see what I was missing. Maybe I slept through a class in med school or residency or something. And it turns out that there was a guy, Thomas Borkovic, who back in the 1980s wrote a very short 2-page paper saying, oh, maybe worry is important, to focus on. And in short, he suggested that worry could be or that anxiety could be reinforced through negative reinforcement with the act of worrying. And when I read that, it blew my mind. It was a total game changer for how
Give me a
I
real
thought
world.
about.
I'm sorry. Play that out for me in terms of how that would look and feel for a person.
Yeah. So let's just start with these basic. So let's start with what is reinforcement learning. So I talked about reinforcement learning with computers. There's a reason that these large language models have been trained using reinforcement learning, because it is the strongest neural network, basically, of how humans learn. And so that got used to help train these bots. And now we have GPT and Claude and Gemini and all of these things. Reinforcement learning is very simple. It is basically, if we think of our ancient ancestors out on the savannah or in the woods, they needed to find food. When they found food, think of that as the cue. They would eat the food, and if the food, tasted good, basically wasn't poison, they would get this cue where their stomach would send this dopamine signal up to their brain and say, remember what you ate and where you found it. And that's called positive reinforcement. You can break that down to 3 elements: a trigger or a cue, a behavior, and a result, right? You see the food, that's the cue. You eat the food, there's the behavior. And the result is that your body says, hey, that's good. That's energy. Go get it again. And so we laid on this memory that says, remember where this food is. So it's actually a memory formation process, right?
Which, by the way, if I can just pause for a second, because that also works in the reverse for trauma or for really challenging things. Your body remembers that moment, whether God forbid, you were, abused somewhere in a location. When you walk by that location, it's the opposite, which is telling you to avoid that situation.
Absolutely. And that's negative reinforcement. So those are the 2 flavors of reinforcement learning: positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement. And that's how we learn as humans, like full stop. That is how we learn all of our habits. That's how we learn most of our behaviors. That's how we learn, develop preferences for foods or relationships or experiences, etc. So I say that because that's the backdrop for how Borkovic suggested that anxiety could be negatively reinforced, meaning, and this is where the terms are important, the feeling of worry, right? So that's a physical sensation often triggered by thoughts. So the feeling of worry or the feeling of anxiety can trigger the mental behavior of worrying. And here's where the crux of it is that worrying as a behavior feels better than doing nothing. So a number of researchers have shown that it makes us feel like we're in control, or gives us the illusion of control. The thing is, worrying is about the future. So it's not actually giving us control because it's in the future, right? Whatever we're worried about, but it feels better than doing nothing. So that gets reinforced. So our brain says, oh, when I feel anxious, I should worry. And we just assume that that's the right thing to do. We just trust our brains. Well, my brain's doing it, so it must be the right thing to do. If we do that enough, this becomes a habit. And I even had somebody who was early, testing one of our early app-based programs for anxiety, who wrote me an email who said, I feel like anxiety is deeply etched in my bones, right? So that was somebody that was so identified with the habit of worrying that she felt like she was just an anxious person. There was nothing she could do. The good news is, if this is a learned behavior as a habit, it can be unlearned.
It's funny, this is not funny because I have had and live with feelings of worry, overwhelm, anxiety, 55 years now. And I used to say things like, I'm a natural born worrier, not warrior. And then I would worry about why I'd worry, like enough of the worrying already. And then I'd worry about why I worried about why I worried. And then I'd be like, Mark, you don't have that much to worry about anymore. Like your life is pretty good. And then I would go to my kind of like family background and be like, yeah, but something bad might happen. um, my hunch is that I'm not alone in terms of like the people that you work with, that kind of meta worry is a big part of their lives.
You're absolutely not alone at all. I see this all the time. This is hallmark. This is classic. And on top of that, so let's even add this on top. I'm thinking of a patient who he basically started getting panic attacks when he was in 5th grade, was, basically worrying his entire life. So when he came to see me, he was about 40 years of age and was just constantly anxious, constantly worried, tried everything. And when, after about 6 months of treatment, when he was much better, he was having significant bouts of not worrying. He noticed that he would start to worry that he wasn't worrying.
Yes.
Which I think sounds similar to what you were describing. So
It's
even,
both.
we can worry
like,
when we're worried, and we can worry that we're not worrying because we might miss something just because it's a habit.
So this is interesting. Now you're going to become my therapist, but I have noticed, because I do worry a lot. For good. And by the way, I don't necessarily think of it as a bad thing because I worry about the things that I care about.
Mhm.
And so I oftentimes reframe that. Like, you just want to do a good job. You want to, when it paralyzes me, it's something else. But here's something that I'd love your thoughts about is I'm very lucky in life now. One of my gifts to myself is I have a pool. And I always wanted a pool, and that's like my beautiful kind of thing that I feel like I worked hard, I got my pool. And I noticed that it really is an escape for me. And then I'm swimming and I'm like one with my environment. And then my brain starts saying, Mark, you should be worrying about something. Like, this is too good. Like, something's about to go wrong. You know it. Don't, this chill feeling is like temporary. You know that. Um, what is your strategy for helping me deal with that?
Well, so generally speaking, I'm guessing you're already good at this, but it starts with knowing how our brains work, right?
Yeah.
And so if we don't know, and I think that's a great example, if we don't know that, we start to worry out of the blue because there's nothing to worry about literally in that
Yeah.
moment. If we don't know that that's a habit, we might just go to strategies that we've done for other things, or try to stop doing it. There's this great Bob Newhart skit from the 1970s called Stop It. I don't know if you've seen it, but it is absolutely worth
Yeah.
watching,
It
where
is funny.
basically patient comes into the therapist's office and in his advice, his therapeutic practice is stop it, but he's making fun of, well, he's bringing to light, I should say, all of this emphasis on just cognizing our way out of things,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I use that as an example because I've had tons of patients who've come to me and they're like, I've tried everything. I've tried, thinking my way out of this. I've tried stopping it. And all of that highlights how they just don't know how their brain works. And if we look at like, oh, this worry comes up as a habit when I'm swimming in the
Mm-hmm.
pool, then we can say, okay, I know what this is. And if we know it is, we know how to work with it. Right. So, in fact, this is where my lab's done several decades of work. We take the same process that forms worry as a habit loop and we turn it on its head and we say, well, if this is a very strong process, why can't we leverage it against
Mm-hmm.
itself?
Mm.
So instead of people trying to stop their their thoughts or all of these things, we say, well, let's just bring something in that we all have, which is
Uh-huh.
curiosity. And what if you get curious about it and start by just exploring, like, oh, is this a habitual process, understanding that, And then we can actually leverage the reinforcement learning against itself to see if worrying is rewarding or not. And we can go
Mhm.
into as much detail as is interesting for you and your
Yeah.
audience. But the short of it is, if something has set up as a habit, we're going to keep doing it until we change the reward value. And we can't force that reward value to change. So you can't
Mhm.
just tell yourself, well, this isn't helpful for me because I'm now, it's just not helpful. But you
Mhm.
can ask, what do I get when I'm swimming in my pool and I'm worrying versus when I'm swimming in my pool and I'm not worrying, right? Is
Mhm.
worrying actually making my life better? So to play therapist for a second,
Yeah, thank you.
if you were just to imagine swimming in your pool worrying, what do you get from worrying?
I get a lack of enjoyment. I mean, it all, it just makes me feel weird and guilty, and I don't know, I get all this kind of like, yeah.
So that in a nutshell is tapping into that negative reinforcement process. And the way to tap into the process is actually a pretty simple equation, is through awareness. We bring curiosity, and
Mhm.
simplify it, but it's not oversimplified. In my clinic, I have my patients train themselves to ask the question, what am I getting from this? So they can feel into their direct experience, not think, oh, I shouldn't worry, but feel into
Mhm.
their direct experience to see what's happening. And what they report is very similar to what you described. Now, if you feel into that every time you worry, does it make you more excited to worry more?
No.
That's negative reinforcement. So you, in neuroscience terms, we're basically changing the reward value. It's called a negative prediction error, meaning that your brain predicted that worrying would be a certain reward value, and it's less than predicted. There's the error part. It's not like your
Mhm.
brain made an error. It's that your brain is paying attention and seeing that the old reward value is erroneous. It's not as rewarding as
Mhm.
expected. And
Well, you're
that's where
reminding me
you
of, like,
tap in.
the whole "don't think about the white bear" experiment, that
Yep.
remember that?
Yep.
And there's a relationship here to that you're
Yep.
reinforcing it by over attending to it. So tell me more about over attending to the worry versus being curiosity about the worry.
Yeah. So what happens when we overattend to something? What's your experience like when you try not to think about the white bear or try not to worry? What happens?
Yeah, it's just like everywhere you go, you see the white bear.
Yeah. So if we get really neuroscience on this, think of this as our brains have these generative models, which is basically a story of how we see the world. And they're going to bias us towards seeing things that are on our mind, so to speak. And so if like, oh, white bear, don't think about the white bear, and then suddenly we're seeing white bears, it's because that is in our working memory and our brain is looking for white bears so that we can not see them. There's there's the
Mhm.
irony.
Yeah, we're reinforcing it unconsciously or whatever, yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and all that. So this is where I think this has been distilled in therapy terms. I don't remember how many years ago I learned this phrase,
Mhm.
what we resist persists. So think about it as, don't think about the white bear, don't worry, right? That's a resistance of our experience. We're resisting it. And guess
Mm.
what? It persists. So you can talk about that therapeutically, you can talk about that from a neuroscience standpoint. They're basically describing the same thing. So that's kind of interesting. How many people have been told just stop it? It's like,
Oh, yeah.
you know, the the
Let it
the
go.
song
Let it
"Don't
go.
Worry, Be Happy," right? Well, it sounds good, but how do we do that?
Well, and I'm curious now as we can make the connection. So, in my first book is called Permission to Feel. And one of the things that I've, now studied and asserted in the book is that we have, as we said earlier, feelings about our feelings. And oftentimes, as a kid who had challenges with lots of things, bullying, fear, anxiety, um, you know, the mantra, I was mostly ignore. I think people back then would say, they wouldn't say anything. They would just be like, I don't know what to do about it. Mark doesn't look very happy right now. I'm just going to ignore it. And so we know what happens there too. That's where the rumination comes in and the self denigration comes in. And at the same time, uh, the concept of permission to feel for me is this idea that we tend to think of these good emotions and bad emotions, and that
Mhm.
anxiety is bad and happy is good. And so we're going to strive to be happy all the time, and we're going to avoid the anxiety. And I tried that for a while and it didn't really work very well. Um, and so I'm wondering, how does the concept of permission to feel resonate with you when as it relates to anxiety?
Great question. And the short answer is that I think of emotions as really good delivers of information, right? Emotions tell us about our environment, both externally and internally, right? If somebody does something and we feel a certain way, that's information. If we have a thought and we feel a certain way, that's information as well. So,
Mhm.
and if there's, something happens in our body and we have a certain feeling, that's information. So, I think of emotions as really essential for survival because they're really good deliverers of information.
Mhm.
Now, if we categorize them and start to judge them and try to have more of this and less of that, that's problematic because we're actually using a system that's not basically not based in neuroscience of like, okay, I want to have more of this and less of this. How to, and magically we wave our wand and we can do it. No.
Mhm.
What we can find is how to leverage that information the most. And I guess I don't not ironically, but for some people this might sound strange. Giving ourselves permission to feel is going to actually let all of that information in so we can live our best lives,
Mhm.
which is different than trying to have certain emotions or in a certain category and less in another category. I don't know if you
Mhm.
remember the now debunked, was it 3-to-1 rule, where it's like if you
Yeah.
think 3 positive thoughts to 1 negative one, it was totally, we
Yeah.
don't need to go into the details, but that was debunked a while ago. It sounded great.
Yeah. It was
Oh, if
like,
I just have this, yes, I can win. It's not how our brains work.
and so there's alignment there, which is reinforcing for me, in a different form of reinforcing. Um, and I'm also wondering about regulation. So, I teach a lot about emotion regulation. That's actually what my new book is about. And I've struggled with people, you know, um, with the questions of, well, isn't the goal of emotion regulation as it relates to anxiety to kind of get rid of the anxiety? And that kind of contradicts with the concept of giving yourself permission to feel the anxiety. It also questions the concept of emotion regulation. What is the goal of emotion regulation? Is it to get rid of the feeling or to be comfortable with the feeling? And I just want you to like riff. I'm curious where you go with that.
Yeah, there are several things I think that are worth unpacking there. So the first one is anxiety is interesting because it is probably an evolutionary bottleneck.
Hmm.
Okay. So, in a nutshell, if you think of anxiety as fear of the future, right, we're afraid that something might happen.
Yeah.
If you break that apart, look at fear, super helpful survival emotion, right? Nobody argues that fear is not helpful. If you look at future and you say, well, what's helpful in the future? Planning is very helpful. Those are two distinct mechanisms. You can plan without fear, you can have fear without planning, right? If you mush those together, you get fear of the future, which has not ever been shown to be helpful. So here, okay, so point number one is anxiety actually may be somewhat of an anomaly in terms of mushing a helpful emotion of fear together with something that it's not supposed to be mushed with, which is planning, right? Because if you're afraid of the future, you can't actually, fear is helpful right now, but it's not helpful beyond right now because you need to get out of the danger, right?
Yeah. It's in the moment. Hmm.
Yeah, exactly. So that's important to know is like, okay, this could be an evolutionary bottleneck, and which gets at your second piece, which is, okay, so how do we work with anxiety? So giving ourselves permission to feel, we can do what you and I just explored, which is to feel the anxiety and then see what we're getting from it. So there are two pieces that I help my patients unpack. One is there's the feeling of anxiety. How am I relating to that feeling of anxiety? Am I
Mm-hmm.
resisting it? In which case it's going to persist. Am I suppressing it? Am I doing all these things? Or am I getting caught up in it? And when we get caught up in the anxiety, that tends to lead to worry or some other behavior that generally isn't helpful. And then
Mm-hmm.
it forms a loop where we get more anxious, right? So we see that, okay, anxiety is not a virtuous cycle. In fact, it's an unvirtuous cycle that just makes our lives miserable. When we can see that and give ourselves permission to feel anxiety and then ask the question, what am I getting from worrying, right? So we can feel anxiety, we can see that it's leading to worrying, and we see that the worrying isn't helpful. That's
Mm-hmm.
where we can unlearn worrying as a habit. Worrying is distinct from anxiety. Then we can step back, and if we're not stuck in a worry loop, we can then ask, okay, can I just be with this feeling of anxiety? And it helps us see, okay, what is anxiety trying to tell me? Nothing. Right? It's not helping me plan because I'm stuck in a thought track.
Yeah.
Right? Planning is different. And maybe we've planned something and then we get worried about all the worst case scenarios that could happen that likely aren't going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So when we do that, we can learn to see that anxiety as a feeling comes and goes. And this is probably one of the most, well, you tell me if, how much you've written about this, but this is where we learn the essential skill of distress tolerance,
Mm-hmm.
which is instead of running away from anxiety or resisting it, we just allow it to be there and learn, oh, it's made up of these sensations. It comes with these thoughts and it comes and goes if I don't do anything to try to make it change. That's
Mm-hmm.
the paradox, is that
Yeah,
the
this is
only thing to
ephemeral.
do about it is to be with it.
And that's like the principle of, impermanence, basically,
Yep.
which is
Yep.
a principle that I kind of live by. The one thing that you just made me think about, because I was, of course, starting to think about the pool situation because I shared that story, and I had this one of the thing that it tends to be one thing. It's not like I worry about everything. I worry about one thing, which is kind of this terrible relationship I had, not romantic, but a friendship years ago. And for whatever, that's the thing that pops into my mind when I go swimming. But one of the epiphanies I had, I was like, first, I haven't even talked to this person in 7 years. And it's like, and then so I just say, like, this is crazy. Like, you're worrying about someone that you haven't even spoken to for 7 years. And then you're probably not going to ever talk to them again. And so, like, your life is pretty freaking good, Mark, if that's the only thing you have to worry about. Like, and I just reframe it like, gosh, your life is pretty freaking good. If that's the only thing that you have to, like, that your brain can search for to worry about, like, life is pretty freaking good. Um, what are your thoughts about that way of approaching, like, just kind of the curiosity that in terms of, like, I don't even, what would you call that I just did in clinical terms?
That's a great question. And I've never been great at latching onto
Uh-huh.
esoteric clinical terms. So there's
Yeah.
probably one specific esoteric term that I
Yeah.
have,
Yeah.
since residency forgotten.
Yeah. Right.
But the way I would describe that pragmatically is kind of, putting things in perspective,
Yeah.
right? You're
Exactly.
just putting it in perspective, and it helps, and you tell me, I won't try to pretend to know your experience, but what this can, getting perspective with anything helps
Yeah.
us see, is something really a problem?
Mm-hmm.
And it can
Yeah.
even flip on its head and say, wait, you know what? It points out how your life is pretty good, right? If this is the only thing I have to worry about, wow,
Yeah. It's
you
like,
might not have
wow.
thought about that before without putting it in perspective.
Yeah. And so how does, you know, you're also a proponent of mindfulness and meditation, and obviously that incorporates kind of Buddhist principles of attachment and impermanence that we were just talking about.
Mhm.
Can you get into a little bit of your work around, you know, the evidence-based models for helping people just manage anxiety?
Sure.
This
Yeah.
is
And I'll give the
go.
nutshell version and double, we can zoom in on anything that would be
Yeah.
helpful. This started back as when I was an assistant professor at Yale, where my lab was studying, as an addiction psychiatrist, was really looking to see how we could develop different treatments for smoking cessation, because my patients
Mhm.
at the VA hospital were struggling. And I went to basically a Buddhist sutta, like some of the early teachings of the Buddha,
Mhm.
that really struck me, where there was this line that said basically exploring gratification to its end. And that said, wait a minute, isn't that reinforcement learning? If you look to see if something's rewarding or not, you're going to change your behavior. So we actually incorporated that into developing our first smoking program. And we got, in a randomized control trial, we got 5 times the quit rates of gold standard treatment for smoking. So it smoked the competition, so to speak. Sorry. And we said, wow, there's something here. And we looked at the mechanisms, and we could identify the psychological mechanisms. We went on years later to do neuroimaging studies showing that this affects a certain brain network called the default mode network, which gets activated when we crave things. And it turns out that network is also activated when we worry. And so if you look at worrying, if you look at cravings and you look at worrying, there's a shared quality where it's basically getting caught up in our experience. Okay.
Mhm.
And so with that, we developed a app-based program actually for anxiety, just testing out like what are the boundaries for, can an app actually help somebody change anxiety
Mhm.
behavior? And it turns out we started with physicians. We got a 57% reduction in these clinically validated anxiety scores. We did a randomized controlled trial with people with generalized anxiety disorder. We got a 67% reduction. We did a replication study in people who were struggling with sleep disturbance. We got a huge reduction in anxiety and also reductions in problems with sleep, because clinically,
Mhm.
my patients, their minds just go crazy at night, right? And they ruminate. So, and they perseverate, they're worried about the future. So we're seeing over and over and over that if we target this key mechanism, right, using reinforcement learning, basically teaching people to be mindfully aware, or even you can distill that to being curious, right? If they can get curious, and instead of going, when they're worried, go, oh no, and start worrying more, we train them to go, oh, is this a habit loop? And oh, what does anxiety feel like? And that curiosity helps them turn toward their experience instead of running away from it. And so over and over and over, we were seeing this. So, we were thinking, wow, this works pretty well. And then we started asking, okay, what's the next way to do this? So, as a clinician, I've been in clinical practice for decades. As a researcher, I've been researching for decades. We've done a bunch of qualitative studies to look at like what's the best way to deliver a modality. So we've done apps, we've done in person, we've done groups, we've done all this. And it turns out this is where, maybe this circles back to thinking about how to make clinicians bionic. We've recorded a ton of my clinical sessions using this methodology. So we've got a specific training for this methodology, and we can actually start to develop therapeutic processes that can be supported by AI. And what that looks like, and I don't think this gets rid of the human element, but we can run groups, for example, online where people can join a program. We give them introductory, you think of it as a flipped classroom model where,
Mhm.
classroom is delivered at home and homework's done in class. So we deliver the didactics through short videos that people get every week. We come together on a Zoom call in the middle of the week to answer questions, have discussion, where people can actually do their homework if they're struggling. And
Mhm.
then we can support them throughout the week. On top of that, we can start to test these. Think of it as a teaching assistant or a therapeutic assistant, where let's call it Dr. Judbot or something. Where if somebody has a question, we can program the bot based on all of my writing, all of our research, and all of my therapeutic sessions to be able to answer a question in a similar manner to how I might answer that question. Now, this is
Mhm.
relatively early stages, but going forward, we feel pretty confident that we can study to see how well this works and then tweak it along the way. Of course, having human oversight over that. Now, that's pretty different than what people are doing right now, which is like, hey, here's this therapy bot, have fun,
Yeah.
and it doesn't have any supervisory oversight. To me, it's critical to pair the human with the bot where we
Yeah.
make the human bionic and also make that scalable and affordable.
And I think the AI probably can be great, like helping you do check in with your practices and all that kind of stuff, like you're saying. But
Yeah.
I'm as someone who can get overwhelmed by a lot of content. You shared a lot just there, and so in a nutshell, just so I can have it in my head, about how long is the treatment for helping people with this? How many sessions does it usually take?
What we found, this is just with our previous digital therapeutics, which are static. So static delivery of content.
Mm-hmm.
We deliver it in about 30 modules over the course, and we actually lock it so people can't binge watch the modules. So what we found is at 2 months, we're seeing pretty significant reductions in anxiety. This is where the 67%
Yeah.
came in. In our new modality, we're actually just starting to run groups now. We're calling it going beyond anxiety. But the idea is we'll start with 3 months of training for people, and then if needed, people can stay in longer. But my hope is that 3 months will give people that solid foundation,
Mm-hmm.
and of course, if they need more, they can certainly stay in longer.
And let's talk a little bit about the are there core elements to the curiosity? Like, what does it look like to be curious?
Let's start with what curiosity isn't, which is anxiety, right? So, not to not to put you on the spot, but when you are anxious,
Mm-hmm.
does it feel more closed and contracted or open and expanded?
It's interesting. I think in the beginning it feels closed and constricted,
Mm-hmm.
but because if I can, where I'm going though with that is that if I get on a roll, it almost like I could just come up with 5,000 things to be anxious about.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah. So you can see, and it's funny. There's a Buddhist term called papancha, which is basically means mental proliferation.
Yeah,
I like the term because it sounds like a horse galloping. Papancha, 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 papancha. So
yeah,
as your mind gallops away with your thoughts, that's very common, to the point where, there was even a specific term for that to help people learn to identify it.
that's cool.
So, your experience is very consistent with what I see clinically, and also what we've done in our research studies is, most people report, when they feel anxious, it feels closed and contracted. It makes sense because fear as a survival mechanism is to help us make ourselves as
Yes,
small
like
a
what?
target. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. Protection, right? We close. We don't do this when we're protecting
you don't
ourselves.
brainstorm a million ideas when you're in that fear place. You're like, give me
Yeah.
the one way. What's the way out of this?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So that's the feeling piece of it. And what's the thinking piece? So I'll just say, my patients tend to report, and tell me if this is your experience. When they're feeling anxious, it's more like an oh no, right? Their brain defaults to this oh no, which tends to spiral out into worry. Does that fit with your experience?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So that's the opposite of curiosity, right? Curiosity, like you're saying, curiosity is great for growth mindset, for brainstorming, stuff like that. So when we can recognize what curiosity isn't, we can then start to recognize what curiosity is.
Mm-hmm.
So the physical sensations tend of the opposite of curiosity or contraction. The thoughts are oh no. Curiosity itself is this feeling of oh.
I like when you say
In
that.
fact, yeah. Oh. And what does it feel like when you go, oh? Does it feel closed or does it feel more open and expanded?
No, it's open and it's like, like it's like possibilities.
Yeah. 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 In fact, one of my former students put me onto a poster. I don't know if you can see it behind me, but I now have that on my wall.
Funny.
Oh, to remind us to be curious. So you ask, what is curiosity? That's what it is. It's not a cognitive thing. It's more of a feeling, experiential thing. Oh, it's an emotion.
All right, but I mean, I can imagine like a meme about you now going viral, like, oh. So um, and it's like so in the O, in the space of the O, and going to the Viktor Frankl, in between stimulus and response, there's the O.
Right. Oh.
Uh, um, is there any? You're saying it's not a thought process, but curiosity is by definition um, having and being inquisitive. No.
It's so, and let's differentiate. There are actually two types. Well, people talk about curiosity different ways. It depends on what viewpoint you're trying to defend.
Mm-hmm.
I fortunately don't have to fight because I'm not a curiosity researcher. I'm a clinician and I'm a habit change researcher. So I look for the pragmatic definitions, and I really like the categorization of Jordan Littman, where he talks about two types of curiosity. One is deprivation and one is interest.
Yeah.
This is built on the backs, on the shoulders of many other folks before him.
Mm-hmm.
But I like that because deprivation curiosity actually feels like, oh no, because we're deprived of information. And so our brain says, go get that information.
Mm-hmm.
Helpful survival mechanism, right? I'm not saying it's bad or we shouldn't have it or we should try to not, get rid of it. But it's about knowing the difference. So there's deprivation curiosity, which actually has more of a flavor of, oh no, like, oh no, what's the answer to that? On the other hand, interest curiosity is more of that, oh, and it's not about getting something specific. It's about being open to receiving information.
Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, certainly it's cognitive because most things are cognitive, but it's not a thinking process. It's an opening process where we're basically putting ourselves squarely in growth mindset. Like, oh, what's going on here, right? Which fits pretty nicely.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was thinking like, I'm in a meeting at work and like it's a loud meeting, and all of a sudden people catch me and like, oh, oh, Mark's anxious again. Obviously, this could be done without the opening of the mouth and the noise. You can just do it in your head.
Yeah.
I'm just joking with you, but and in that process of that pause to do the physical or psychological it does just sort of like, it's like kind of the light bulb, right, goes off, and and you're like, oh, I'm curious. Mm-hmm. And do people die? Do you kind of, is this like, if you have like I do, like that kind of personality that's like, tell me more, let me go here, let me dissect it. My hunch is that it's not going in that direction.
That's right. It opens us up to what is the most skillful direction to move in that moment. So I think of, if this is helpful, think of deprivation curiosity as the destination, right? If we're missing a piece of information and we get it, we've arrived. Interest curiosity is more the journey, right? The joy of discovery. So if we're open, then we can see where we need to be going. It's not telling us where to go. It's just helping us not get stuck in a certain direction that might not be helpful.
And so tell me what is the, if that's the core of the intervention, why does it take 3 months for that to kind of solidify? Is it just that you need to do 300,000 times for it to become a habit?
In a nutshell, there are some people that take to it very quickly and show huge reductions in anxiety pretty rapidly. So that's more of a bell curve than an individual thing. And that one thing we're pretty excited about with the Going Beyond Anxiety program is we can actually personalize this and at the same time have this accessible to many people, where if they're like getting it right away, we can say, great, keep going. And if somebody's struggling, we can say, okay, do this, and do this. So, these are population-based studies. If you look at it, there's a wide distribution where some people get it really quickly. A lot of people get it not too long. And then some people take a little bit longer. And some of it is that people just get stuck in their heads, where they're so stuck in the habit of trying to force themselves not to worry or whatever, that they just need to learn to have confidence that the process will work. And that's where support comes in, right? And human and maybe even bot support there as well. It's like, okay, they're like, I don't know if this works. They have doubt. they can ask the bot a question. The bot can say, no, you're on track. And then they can come to our group and we can say, yeah, you're on track. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Or, well, here's a tweak.
And is part of it the recognition of that experience? Like I've come, and by the way, I've read your books, and I have, I'm asking you these questions for other people, but I'm also trying to get deeper from my own experience. The is what I've noticed for myself in using that curiosity, for my anxiety, is that oftentimes that it's almost like, oh, you're here again, welcome, and by the time I say, oh, you're here again, I've already let it go. It acts almost as a little strategy.
Mm-hmm.
Does that track
Well,
with you?
did you say, oh, you're here again?
Yes.
That's it. And often when something has lost its reward value, it's simply a matter of just pointing out that, oh, there's that habit again. And we don't have to go through the process of evaluating how rewarding it is and, how much better it feels not to do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that little reminder, oh, there you did that little habit,
Mm-hmm. And it's
So it
interesting
tracks
because,
perfectly with your experience.
and also what I'm hearing is that it's like, oh, you're here again, hi, um, and but not attaching, oh, you're here again, you asshole, right? Like that, that real kind of, and then that, oh, you're here, and now I have something that I should be thinking about all day long about blah blah blah.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
there's a nuance there.
There is, absolutely. And I'm glad you're pointing it out because I think this will help, anybody that gets stuck in this, which is, oh, you're here again. That's a sign of resistance, right?
Yeah.
And just like anxiety can feel contracting, resistance also feels like a contraction because we're kind of, we're trying to muscle up to try to fight the thing, oh, I'm resisting this. And we get to see pretty quickly how, what do I get from resistance? It doesn't help. What we resist
Mm-hmm.
persists. And so even that little inflection shift from oh to oh helps us not resist what's happening. And as you were highlighting, we don't have to do anything else. The thing will go
Mm-hmm.
away on its own. So it's a beautiful example of we really don't have to do anything to make our thoughts change. If they are unrewarding, they will not persist as much or as often just by the simple fact that
Mm-hmm.
they don't feel good.
And my hunch is that these things are tweaked for different types of anxieties. So a generalized anxiety disorder versus a social phobia versus, another form. That there has to be some, your whole model is compassion focused.
Mm-hmm.
So not like the O can work for certain things, but not for every single thing. Or do you think it works across all?
It's a great question. So clinically, there's a through line here, which is, for example, social phobia. We can look at the learned behavior around social phobia, right? If I think about going out into public and then I have this unpleasant feeling that says don't go out, the behaviors that we don't go out, and then we miss out on life, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we don't see that that's a habit and we don't really explore with compassion, right? What do I get from not going out? Then we're not going to change that behavior. So just
Mm-hmm.
using that as an example, there's a through line that's helpful for a lot of these things. So I've had it work for a lot of folks with PTSD. I myself have had panic attacks. I've worked with a lot of people with panic disorder, social phobia.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just thinking of a patient that I've been working with recently who was talking about like how she's now going out on Fridays to go square dancing or something like that, which she hadn't done before. And it really highlights her diving into and seeing like, oh, this feeling that I'm having is limiting my life. It's just literally a
Mm-hmm.
feeling that goes away on its own if I just attend to it, if I bring curiosity to it.
Mm-hmm. As opposed to the person who is in an abusive relationship, who's having anxiety, or a person who is, being, ridiculed at work by their boss, right? Then you obviously have, there's, and you, obviously it's a whole different story, right? That sometimes real intervention is needed.
It is, and you're highlighting something important, which is for example, in an abusive relationship, there can be the fear of change that limits someone from actually changing their circumstances. So,
Yeah,
there's always this question like, why do people in abusive relationships gravitate toward other abusive relationships? This is too simplified, but the idea is if it's something familiar, our brains will gravitate toward things that are familiar. And so the familiar provides a comfort zone, even if it's not comfortable in overall net. So it's important to be able to, and I just wrote a Substack that I'll be publishing in the next couple of weeks called "Is This Dangerous or Different?" And so it's important for people to be able to ground themselves and ask, oh, is this dangerous, or is this just different where my brain is registering this as dangerous because it's different? That's really important for people to be able to differentiate. I've had a number of patients who've really been helped by just starting to ask that question. Is this dangerous or different? And ironically, they sometimes they recognize, oh, I'm actually in an abusive relationship. Being here is worse than trying something new, and I can get over the hump of this something else being different because it's actually probably going to be a lot more rewarding than staying where I am.
I know that we don't have much time, but I'm curious. So in my work, we teach people a lot of words to describe the family of anxiety or stress. And I happen to be a stickler about like the vocabulary, because I think many of us say, I'm anxious when we're disappointed, or we're overwhelmed when we're actually stressed, or whatever it might be. And so we have our clear definitions of these concepts. And I always, borrowing, and I never knew who said this first, but the name it to tame it phenomenon.
Yeah.
And we now say label it to regulate it. And the like as a parent or as a partner, oftentimes people will say, I can't take it anymore. I'm so overwhelmed. I'm so stressed. And oftentimes it's not about this uncertainty around the future. It's like you were saying, like I realized also when I was going up for tenure back about a decade ago, I went to the doctor. I was having terrible heartburn and a lot of rumination. And the doctor, for 10 minutes with my doctor, he's like, here's your Prilosec for your anxiety, and here's your Ativan. Here's your Prilosec for your heartburn, and here's your Ativan for your anxiety. I'm like, that's it? He's like, yeah, this is the way it is. This is that time of your life where you're going to have heartburn and anxiety. I'm like, just take these two things and it'll be fine. Talking about lack of curiosity, right?
Yeah.
And so then I got really curious, and I'm going for these walks, and I'm like, Mark, you're like the director of the Center for Freaking Emotional Intelligence. How are you feeling? And I went through the list of like, am I anxious about it? Not really. I got the grants, I got the papers. Am I stressed? No, I don't have that many demands. I've got people to help out. And I realized I was just completely overwhelmed, just saturated. I was saying yes to everything. I was emailing at 7 a.m. and then doing email at midnight. And then I'd finally say, I'm anxious. I would say these kind of things to myself. And it wasn't really about the uncertainty. It was just saturation. How much do you think that helps in terms of helping when you're engaging in the curiosity piece? Do you feel like it's helpful for people to kind of differentiate their experience?
Absolutely. And you already know this from the countless number of people that your work has helped. The being clear is very helpful in one aspect. There are many aspects for that, but one of them being we can get accurate information. If we lump anxiety together with overwhelm and we try to treat the anxiety, but it's actually overwhelm, we're misdiagnosing the problem. But if we can develop some emotional intelligence and be able to say, oh, this is overwhelm, it's not anxiety, then we can ask the question, okay, what's causing the overwhelm?
Yeah.
And how do I meet that as compared to anxiety? Because often we're going to treat anxiety very differently than overwhelm.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing that helped. Well, I won't
Yeah,
guess what happened.
I
But
just
how did that
realized
help you?
Yeah, instead of scheduling yoga and scheduling, my life was so scheduled, it was sort of like overwhelming. And
Yep.
I'm like, I'm going to schedule nothing. Actually, give myself a break because I
Schedule
really
swimming in the pool.
exactly. So then I could go back to work. No, um, but it was very eye opening for me to just
Yeah.
get curious about what I was really feeling, to then use that as because when the pandemic hit and the university shut down, and then I was anxious. I did get anxious. There was a lot of uncertainty. Like people were asking me, like, Mark, when are we going? What's happening with the center? I'm like, I don't know.
I don't know.
I'm not the CDC and I'm not the president of Yale. So like, and I had to use those kinds of strategies, which was like, Mark, you have no control over this. This is,
Yep.
let's just be with the uncertainty and let's check in every day and help support each other. I learned every park in New Haven. I went for long walks and it was actually pretty interesting. Um, but the obviously, like when your brain is locked into the what ifs, the what ifs, the what ifs, around the future versus the overwhelm, which is I feel like I can't get out from underneath this. That's this. I'm saturated. It is a completely different psychological experience,
Yep.
but it may show up the same physically.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
our bodies kind of trick ourselves too. That feeling of whatever it might be, the tension or the stomach thing or the whatever, the heart rate goes up, etc. And so in your work, um, cover the vocabulary piece. I'm just curious, besides that curiosity piece, and as we kind of bring our time to a close, what are the other elements or other strategies that you've, having seen hundreds of patients, that you find helpful?
A great question. The short answer is, the the more we learn, the less we need to know, in the sense that we've actually learned a ton, suggesting that curiosity is the top of the list, and the more research we do, the higher it goes on the list.
Interesting.
Yeah, which, I'm all for, like, let's find the 5 things and then have people pick what works best for them. It turns out that curiosity is probably a winner for anyone. And the nice thing is everybody has it. But what we're finding over and over is we're seeing it linked to the specific mechanisms of how our brains work. So we get more confident that we're like, oh yeah, this makes sense, this makes sense, this makes sense theoretically. But the real confidence driver is seeing that people are like, oh, if I just simplify it and not try to use 5 different strategies, but just focus on curiosity, things move along more efficiently and more
Mm-hmm.
quickly. So people don't get confused as much when they focus on it,
Yeah.
and I think of it as a support for all these other things. So curiosity helps someone identify their emotions. It
Mm-hmm.
helps someone be able to be in growth mindset. It helps someone see when they're stuck in an old habit that's not helping, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a support for all these other functions that are critical for life.
And on top of that, I'm sure you would agree, the sleep stuff helps, the good nutrition
Oh,
helps, the
yeah.
physical activity helps, as a general temperature lower, if you want to call it that.
Absolutely. And what I like about it is that it can help people see, oh, what's like, am I not getting enough sleep? And what do I get when I'm not getting enough sleep? Right. So there are tons of research. We're not the physical exercise researchers. We're not the nutrition. We're not the sleep. There's a ton of science, showing that there in lifestyle medicine, I think there are 5 or 6 or 8 pillars, right?
Yeah.
Over and over and over, it's been shown all these things you're talking about: sleep, diet, exercise, relationships, all helpful.
Mm-hmm.
If we can't see that they are helpful, we're less likely to do them more. So what we also find is that curiosity is a great way to turbocharge these other things, because we
Mm-hmm.
start to see, we call this finding the bigger, better offer. We see, oh, when I actually exercise, my life is better. when I get enough sleep, my life is better. But if we can't see that cause and effect
Mhm.
relationship, if we can't see that those are positively reinforcing, we're less likely to think of them that way. And we're more likely to be like, oh, I should exercise. My doctor told me to exercise, so I should. We should all over ourselves, right? The shoulding doesn't change behavior. It's really the reinforcement learning that does.
And we can't escape being human, right? Which
Right.
is that, like, even like the Olympic athlete who eats the right, just every microgram and macronutrient that's perfect for their body, and they have the best physical shape, and they get the right, they time their sleeps and track their sleep.
Right.
They still get anxious.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
So
so,
that the mental fitness is just as important as the physical fitness. We've trained Olympic athletes, and they're top of the top in the physical form. And so how can we help them be top of the top for the mental form as well?
yeah, this is awesome. And so, Judd, just going as we wrap up, it's clear you've got like all these, you got the books, you got the apps, you got the research, all the evidence base, as we, like to call it, is pretty solid. Obviously, you'll keep doing more to refine it.
Yep.
But yet, you look at the national data and everybody is more anxious than they were a decade ago.
Yeah.
So what's
Yeah.
the problem? Like, why, what is it? Is it an implementation problem? Like, is it an awareness problem? Like, what from a now let's go not to your patients, but let's go to we're in the United States. Let's go to a societal level. What is needed to help decrease anxiety at the society level?
And this could probably be another hour, so I'll try to put it in a 30-second soundbite. One is if we look at there are a number of factors like information overload, where our brains are naturally inclined to try to get information. It's a survival mechanism. On top of that, now we have disinformation and misinformation, where we have to sort through what is real and what's fake. That is really problematic because nobody's an expert on everything. So that freaks us all out.
Mm-hmm.
There's FOMO, there's all this stuff. So there's a lot that has to do with just more of a hyper connected world that is contributing to the anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of uncertainty. There's always been uncertainty, but it can feel like there's a lot more when it comes to climate, adding to political, adding to social, adding to other things, and economy.
Mm-hmm.
So what about treatment delivery? Well, it takes a long time to implement evidence-based treatments.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing we've been studying is like, how can we develop something that's scalable, that is evidence-based? And, it just takes a while to get these things out there.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like the that's kind of where I come from, which is start as early as you possibly can, prevention, and it's not going to prevent everything because life happens, but
Right.
hopefully we can reduce the number of new patients that you need to see. um, the It is interesting because a parent reached out to me yesterday. She's like, "How you? I dare you try to tell me to be less anxious and about my kid going to school. There were 80 school shootings last year in the United States." And I was, I was like, that's a lot more than when I was a kid. And so, 2 or 3, 80 though, it does, I just say that and I get, a feeling of anxiety. And so for people who are attaching to those messages in our society, that it is unsafe, or are focusing heavily on the political kind of turmoil that seems to be happening in our society, or these larger climate change. I mean, when I was a kid, we heard about climate change, but of the top 5 for high schoolers, that's one of them. And so, in your final words, when you're pushed for, how do I apply all of the great work you're doing in a world that feels like this? What do you say?
I would say 2 things. One is get to know your brain, like understand how your brain works. And as part of that, the second piece I would say is, map out that habit loop of worrying and ask, what am I getting from this right now? So
Mhm.
let's use that concrete example. Okay, there were 80 school shootings in this last year. What do I get from worrying about that? You know,
Mhm.
is that helping, or is that limiting me in how I go forward with determining the best course of action for my family and my kids, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. And most likely, the rumination and worrying about it isn't going to help you feel better.
Right. Right.
And so let's end with that piece. So I recognize that, yeah, you're right. Like just sitting around all day long worrying about that or thinking about that is not going to help me. Well, then what am I supposed to do? It's not what's the piece after that?
Once we are able to step out of our worry habit loops, then we can plan effectively.
Mm-hmm.
So in a grounded way, we can ask, okay, what's the best course of action to move forward as compared to, oh no, I have to do something very different. And we can actually look around and ask, what is the best course of action? And we can also learn to be with uncertainty more, because we might not know the best course of action, but we can try something and learn from it.
And it makes sense to me that the like what I'm thinking about is the utility of causing so much suffering in your life. You know, is how productive is it for you every day to wake up before you go to school to have these thoughts? And I think when you get curious about that, you realize, gosh, this is really not helping me with my life. There's probably something else better I can do.
And that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, this was really cool. So tell everybody how they can learn more about your work.
I would say, so they can check out our Going Beyond Anxiety program. I think it's just goingbeyondanxiety.com if they want to learn about the ways that we're, scaling the anxiety treatment. I've got a Substack. I think it's just juddbrewer.substack.com. So where I'll try to put out, information on a weekly basis. I have a newsletter there. And then also just a bunch of free resources and educational material on drjudd.com, my website.
Awesome. And great books and apps and all that.
Oh yeah, that too.
Yeah, you got a lot of stuff. There's a lot of anxious people. They need a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks so much, Judd.
My pleasure.
It was fun.